If Richard Nixon chose George H.W. Bush as his running mate in 1968, so former Vice President Richard Nixon becomes the Republican Party's presidential nominee, and he picks George Herbert Walker Bush as his running mate. So Nixon and Bush would win the election, Hubert Humphrey would lose, and from here, Richard Nixon would be president, and George H.W. Bush would be vice president. And they would make it through the first term with the same horrible policies in real life. And they would run for re election and win, and George McGovern would lose. Now, from here, Richard Nixon would, of course, be exposed little by little, and he'd be in a lot of trouble. And Richard Nixon would resign, and George H.W. Bush would become the president due to Richard Nixon resigning. And George H.W. Bush would do the same horrible things as Gerald Ford and pardon Richard Nixon and aid and abet the Indonesian genocide of East Timor. Now, in this universe, George H.W. Bush would also be very unpopular, and he would lose to Jimmy Carter. And Jimmy Carter would be the new president. Now, George H.W. Bush would not have much of a political office future after this because he would have too much baggage from being Nixon's vice president, also pardoning Nixon, and Bush would also already have been president for a very short amount of time, so it just really wouldn't do him any favors. So George H.W. Bush's career would probably end, and Ronald Reagan would come and beat Jimmy Carter, and Ronald Reagan's running mate would just be someone else. And Ronald Reagan and that someone else would do horrible things for 2 terms, and the president after Ronald Reagan, that would be very interesting because without George H.W. Bush in the picture, would Ronald Reagan's alternate VP in this alternate timeline win the presidency after, and would that person, if he did win the presidency, lose to Bill Clinton after? It's very hard to say. So with George H.W. Bush being Richard Nixon's running mate in this universe, Bush's career would have been over very soon. So yes, that's what would have happened.